Welcome back to The Scary Collector. I want you to do something for me before we begin tonight. I want you to take a slow look around the room you are sitting in right now. Look at the corners. Look at the spaces behind furniture, behind doors, in the places where the light does not quite reach. Now ask yourself, are you completely sure you are alone? Good, because the stories I am about to tell you tonight are not fiction. They are not the product of some writer's imagination sitting comfortably at a desk with a cup of coffee. These are accounts from real people. People like you and me, who encountered something they could not explain. Something that shattered their understanding of the world. And in some cases, something that cost them everything. Tonight on The Scary Collector, we have 5 stories. Each one was submitted, documented, or independently corroborated. Each one will crawl under your skin and stay there long after this video ends. Story 1 takes us to a quiet boarding house in a small Midwestern town, where a young woman slowly begins to realize that the other residents are not quite what they appear. Story 2 follows a man on a late-night drive who finds himself pursued by something that should not exist on any road in the world. Story 3 uncovers what detectives found in the basement of a woman named Linda. Something that had been hidden there for years, growing quietly in the dark. Story 4 comes from a hospital orderly who worked the overnight shift and began noticing a pattern in the deaths on his floor. A pattern that led him somewhere he was never meant to go. And Story 5, the one that still keeps me up at night, comes from a grown man who watched his father return from a 2-week fishing trip and became increasingly certain that whatever came back through that door was not his father at all. Are you comfortable? Good. Turn off any unnecessary lights. Pull the blanket a little tighter. This is The Scary Collector. And tonight we begin. Story 1. The Boarding House on Elsinore Lane. Part 1. Arrival. September is a beautiful month in most parts of the country. The air turns cool. The leaves begin their slow surrender to rust and amber. There is something about September that feels like a fresh start. A closing of summer's chapter and an opening of something quieter, more introspective. For 23-year-old Mara Connolly, September of 2019 was supposed to be exactly that. A fresh start. She had just broken off a 3-year relationship. She had left behind her apartment in Columbus, Ohio, quit a job she hated at an insurance company, and moved to the small town of Harwick, Indiana, population 6,000, to take a position at the county library. It was a lateral move financially, but emotionally, it felt like breathing for the first time in years. She found the listing for Elsinore Boardinghouse on a local community board. $45 a week. Room and board included. Communal kitchen. Quiet residence. No smoking. No pets. The house itself was an old Victorian. 3 stories, pale gray paint. A wraparound porch with 2 rocking chairs that nobody ever seemed to use. When Mara arrived with her 2 suitcases and a box of books, the landlady, a woman named Mrs. Drayscott, met her at the door. Mrs. Drayscott was somewhere in her late 60s. Small and wiry with hair the color of iron and eyes that were very dark and very still. She smiled when she saw Mara. It was a precise smile, Mara would later say, not warm exactly, but correct, like a smile that had been practiced until it was technically accurate. She showed Mara to her room on the 2nd floor. It was clean, spare, comfortable enough. Single bed, a writing desk, a closet with a sticky door, and a window that looked out over the back garden, which was overgrown but somehow beautiful in its wildness. Dinner is at 6. We eat together. All residents. How many residents are there? Present. For including yourself. You will meet them tonight. She left without another word. Mara unpacked her clothes, arranged her books on the windowsill, and lay on the narrow bed listening to the house breathe. The tick and groan of old wood, the sound of someone moving quietly in the room above her. She told herself it was charming. K. She would tell herself that for about 2 more weeks. Part 2. The Residence. Dinner that first evening was quiet and strange in a way Mara could not immediately define. The 3 other residents were already seated when she came downstairs. There was Edgar, a man in his mid-40s with a neat gray beard and a habit of straightening silverware even when it was already perfectly aligned. There was Ruth, a woman of perhaps 30, thin as a reed, who worked, she said, at the local pharmacy and spoke in very slow and very measured sentences, as if each word was being carefully selected from a list. And there was Owen, the youngest of the 3. Maybe 20, Mara guessed, with lank hair over his forehead and a way of holding very still at the table that she found oddly unnerving. They were all perfectly polite. They passed the food. They answered Mara's small talk with small talk of their own. But throughout the meal, Mara had the persistent and irrational feeling that she was being observed in some coordinated way, that whenever she turned to speak to one person, the others were watching her from the edge of her vision with an attention that was just a fraction too intense. She dismissed the feeling. She was nervous. She was in a new place surrounded by strangers. That was all. After dinner, as Mara helped clear the plates, Ruth paused beside her at the kitchen sink and said, very quietly and without looking at her, "Sleep W. If your window closed tonight." "Sorry?" "The garden. There are animals. They come in if the window is open." She moved away before Mara could respond. Mara closed her window that night. She heard scratching on the glass around 3 in the morning. Could have been a branch. There were no trees near enough to reach the window. Part 3. The Pattern. By the end of the first week, Mara had developed a cautious fondness for the routine of the house. Breakfast was self-service. Dinner was communal. The library was a 10-minute walk. Her co-workers were welcoming. And Harwick was exactly the quiet small town she had hoped it would be. But there were small things that did not add up. She noticed that none of the other residents ever seemed to receive phone calls or visitors. She noticed that Edgar spent his evenings in the sitting room reading the same newspaper. Not a different edition, the same one, dated from 3 weeks before she arrived. Though he never seemed to finish it, she noticed that Owen, who claimed to be a student, never carried any books and never left the house before noon. She noticed that when she passed Ruth's room late at night, there was never any sound from inside. No movement, no breathing, no television, nothing, just silence so complete it felt pressurized, like the room had been sealed. She brought these observations up with a co-worker named Patrice, a practical woman in her 50s who had lived in Harwick her whole life, Elsinore, on the corner of Marsh Road. "You know it? Who is the landlady?" "Mrs. Drayscott." "Honey, Mrs. Drayscott died in 2011. Her daughter took over the house. Looks just like her. People confuse them sometimes. Probably just that. The daughter. What's her first name?" She never told me her first name." Patrice did not say anything else, but she watched Mara for the rest of the afternoon in a way that felt a great deal like concern. Part 4. What Mara Found. It was the 3rd week when things became undeniable. Mara had been shelving books in the local history section at the library when she came across a bound collection of old Harwick Gazette archives. She was not looking for anything in particular. She was just killing time before her lunch break. She found it by accident. October 1987, a small article on page 6, below an advertisement for a hardware store. The headline read, "Family of 4 found deceased at Elsinore Boardinghouse." She read it slowly. A couple named Edgar and Dorothy Finch and their 2 adult children, Owen and Ruth, had been found dead in their rooms at the boarding house by the landlady, a Mrs. Hetty Drayscott. Cause of death was listed as suspected carbon monoxide poisoning, though investigators noted that the building's ventilation was found to be perfectly functional. The case had been ruled accidental. Pending a full coroner's report, Mara sat very still in the quiet library. Edgar. Ruth. She told herself it was a coincidence. Common names. Old house, old story. Surely the people living there now were different people who happened to have the same names. It happened. It was a small town. Names recycled through generations. But she went home that evening with her heart hammering. Dinner was quiet as always. Edgar straightened his silverware. Ruth spoke slowly and deliberately. Owen sat without moving for most of the meal. Mrs. Drayscott, or whoever she was, served the soup with that precise, practiced smile. Mara looked at the photograph she had discreetly taken with her phone of the newspaper archive. She looked at the names. Edgar Finch, 44. Owen Finch, 20. Ruth Finch, 30. She looked at the man across the table, straightening his fork, the woman beside him, choosing her words one at a time, the young man barely moving in his chair. She put her spoon down and excused herself. She packed her bags that night. She did not sleep. At 4 a.m, she carried her suitcases down the stairs as quietly as she could and walked out the front door of Elsinore Boardinghouse into the cold September air. She did not look back. She did not need to. She already knew that if she did, she would see 3 faces in the upstairs windows, watching her go. Mara Connolly now lives in a different state. She has never returned to Harwick, Indiana. She shared her story with us through a mutual contact and asked only that we never mention her real name. The boarding house on Elsinore Lane is still listed for rent. The rate is still $45 a week. Quiet residence. No smoking. No pets. Story 2. The Man in the Yellow Raincoat. Part 1. The Drive. David Marsh was 51 years old. A project manager at a manufacturing firm, sensible and methodical in the way that men in his profession tend to become after enough years of solving other people's problems. He drove a beige sedan. He kept a paper map in his glove compartment as a backup even though he also had GPS. He had never believed in the supernatural, the paranormal, or anything that could not be explained by sufficient information and calm analysis. He wants me to be clear about that. He told his story to us with the specific caveat that he is not the kind of person who sees things. He does not have an overactive imagination. He is not prone to anxiety or dissociation or any of the other rational explanations he himself attempted to apply to what happened to him on the night of November 14, 2021. He was driving home from a conference in Milwaukee. It was late, past midnight. He had declined to stay at the hotel because his daughter's school play was the next morning, and he did not want to miss it. The route took him through a stretch of rural Wisconsin highway, long and straight and dark, with fields on both sides and no other cars for miles in either direction. The rain started around midnight. Not heavy at first, a light drumming on the windshield, the kind you turn the wipers to their lowest setting for. David was listening to a sports podcast, drinking cold coffee from a travel mug, watching the white lines pass under his headlights in their steady hypnotic rhythm. He first saw the figure at approximately 12:45. It was on the right shoulder of the road. A person in a yellow raincoat, standing still, facing the passing lane. No car nearby. No broken-down vehicle. No bag or luggage. Just a person in a yellow raincoat, standing in the rain, in the dark, on an empty rural highway at 12:45 in the morning. David slowed. Not to a stop. You hear enough news stories about highway robberies and carjackings, and this was a dark road and he was alone. But he slowed to look. The figure did not move, did not look up, did not flag him down or raise a hand. David drove on. Part 2. IT comes back. He had gone perhaps 2 miles when he saw the figure again. Same yellow raincoat, same posture, standing perfectly still, facing the road. right shoulder, standing in the rain. David's first thought was logical. This was a different person. Two people in yellow raincoats on a rural highway in the rain in the middle of the night. Unusual, certainly, but not impossible. Maybe there had been a bus accident further up the road. Maybe there was a group of them. He slowed again, more reluctantly this time. He looked. The figure's head turned slightly as his headlights swept past. Not to look at him, just turned like something adjusting its orientation by a fraction of a degree. David accelerated. His podcast was still playing. His coffee was still warm. He told himself he was tired. He told himself he had been driving for 3 hours and his brain was doing what brains do at midnight on empty roads. Generating patterns, generating threats, manufacturing significance out of nothing. He turned the podcast up a little louder. The figure was there again at the 1-mile mark. Same yellow raincoat. Same stillness. But now it was standing in the middle of the shoulder, just at the edge of the lane, close enough that David had to veer slightly left to pass it without clipping it. As he did, his headlights swept across it fully for just a moment. David pulled over 400 meters down the road and sat with his hazard lights going and his hands shaking on the steering wheel, because the figure in the yellow raincoat did not have a face. Not a masked face. Not a face turned away. Not poor visibility in the rain. Where the face should have been, there was simply nothing. Smooth, uniform, the same pallid non-color as the inside of a shell. David sat in his car for 11 minutes. He timed it. He was the kind of person who noted the time, even when his hands were shaking. Then he did the most David Marsh thing possible. He pulled out his paper map and found an alternate route home. Part 3. The Long Way Home. The alternate route added 40 minutes to his drive but took him through 2 small towns and kept him on lit roads for the majority of the way. It was 3:20 in the morning when he pulled into his driveway. His wife was asleep. He sat at the kitchen table and wrote down everything that had happened in the Notes app on his phone, with timestamps, the way he would have documented a project anomaly at work. He did not sleep that night. The next morning he attended his daughter's school play. She played a talking oak tree in a production about the seasons, and she was extraordinary. He cried twice and felt, for a few hours, that the world made complete sense. Then he drove home from the school on familiar suburban roads and saw, at the corner of his own street, standing on the sidewalk in broad daylight, a figure in a yellow raincoat, standing still, facing the road. He did not slow down. He drove past it. He did not look, or rather, he tried not to look, but in the moment his peripheral vision caught the edge of it. As the car passed close, he could not stop his eyes from moving. The head turned, just slightly, following him. He drove into his garage and closed the door and sat in the parked car for a long time. Part 4. The Last Sighting. Over the next 3 weeks, David saw the figure 11 more times. Always in yellow, always still, always that fractional turn of the featureless head as he passed. He saw it outside his office building. He saw it across the street from his daughter's school. He saw it in the parking lot of a grocery store at 2 in the afternoon. He saw it once, only once, at the end of his own driveway at night, standing at the edge of the cone of light from his porch lamp, just beyond where the light reached. He never told his wife. He did not want to frighten her. He did not want to frighten himself either with the act of saying it out loud and making it real. He consulted a doctor who found nothing wrong with him physically or neurologically. He consulted a therapist who suggested that he was processing stress and anxiety in unusual ways and recommended mindfulness exercises. He did the mindfulness exercises. He still saw the figure. The last time David Marsh saw the man in the yellow raincoat was on December 9, 2021. He was driving to work in the early morning. Frost on the grass, sky still dark at 6:30. He came to a red light, and the figure was there on the opposite corner, standing still, facing him directly now. Not facing the road, but facing his car, as if it had been waiting specifically for him. David stared at it. For the first time, he did not look away. He stared at it steadily, hands loose on the wheel, and he thought with a clarity that surprised him. I see you. You are there. I don't know what you are, but I see you. The light turned green. He drove forward. When he passed the corner, the figure was gone. He has not seen it since. He does not know what it was. He does not know why it followed him or what it wanted or why it stopped. He only knows that when he stopped running from it, when he stopped looking away, it disappeared. He is still not sure if that is reassuring or terrifying than anything else. Story 3. What Linda Kept in the Basement. Part 1. A Good Neighbor. Linda Barrow was, by all accounts, an excellent neighbor. She had lived in the same house on Carpenter Street in a mid-sized Texas town for over 20 years. She brought cookies to new neighbors when they moved in. She organized the block's annual 4th of July cookout. She volunteered at the food pantry twice a month. She was the kind of woman who remembered the names of children and dogs and asked after them by name the next time she saw you. She was 63, recently retired from a career in school administration, widowed with 2 adult daughters who lived in other states but called regularly. Nobody had a bad word to say about Linda Barrow. This is not unusual, it turns out. Many people, looking back, will tell you that the person they never suspected was exactly the kind of person who was very easy not to suspect. The discovery was made in March of 2022, and it did not come from a neighbor's suspicion or a police investigation. It came from Linda herself. She called 911. She said, very calmly, that she needed someone to come to her house. She said she had something in her basement that she needed to tell the police about. She said she was sorry. She said she had been meaning to tell someone for a long time. 2 officers arrived within 8 minutes. Linda met them at the door in a floral blouse with a cup of tea in her hand and showed them down the basement stairs herself. Part 2. The Collection. We are not going to describe in graphic detail what the officers found in Linda Barrow's basement. This is not because we want to protect the innocent. It is because some things described in clinical detail lose the weight of their meaning. And what Linda had kept deserves weight. What the officers found was a collection. That is the word that appeared most frequently in the official reports. And it is the most accurate word. A collection, meticulously organized and carefully preserved, of items belonging to people who had been reported missing in the state of Texas over the past 19 years. Not all of the missing persons. Not all of their belongings. Personal items. The kind that would not be missed in an initial inventory. Items that might have been left behind or assumed lost in the confusion of a disappearance. A child's drawing. A birthday card. A man's wedding ring. Not from any of the official missing persons reports, but identified later through DNA trace as belonging to a man who had vanished in 2009 and whose disappearance remained unsolved. 47 items. 43 connected to documented missing persons cases. The other 4, as of the time of this writing, have not yet been attributed. Linda Barrow, sitting at her kitchen table with her tea, told the officers that she had not harmed any of the people those items belonged to. She said that she had simply taken the items. She did not explain how or when or why she had had access to those scenes in the first place. Not until she was formally questioned several hours later. Part 3. What Linda said. In her interview, which lasted over 7 hours, and which investigators described as unlike anything they had encountered in their combined 40 years in law enforcement, Linda Barrow said the following. She said that she had a gift. Not those words exactly. She was careful with her language, and this is a paraphrase of a much longer and more circuitous explanation. She said that she was able to sense, sometimes with great precision and sometimes only vaguely, when a person was about to leave a place forever. Not die necessarily, just leave, disappear from a location, from a life, from a story. She said that when this happened, she felt compelled to be present, to witness the moment of leaving, and to take something small, something unimportant, as a marker, the way, she said, a botanist might press a flower from a location they had visited. She did not believe she had done anything wrong. She said this clearly and without apparent distress or deception. The officers and investigators who were present described her effect as serene. The effect, one of them later noted in writing, of someone who has carried a secret for a very long time and has finally, with great relief, set it down. She was asked directly, had she caused any of the disappearances? Had she harmed anyone? She said no. She said that was not what she did. She said she only came after. Investigators spent 14 months attempting to prove otherwise. Forensic analysis of every item in the collection, DNA testing, timeline reconstruction. They found no evidence linking Linda Barrow to any act of violence or abduction. Several of the missing persons were found alive in the years following her arrest. In other states, under other names, having chosen to disappear voluntarily for reasons entirely their own. The others remain missing. Linda Barrow pled guilty to a reduced set of charges relating to theft and evidence tampering. She served 18 months in a minimum security facility and was released in 2024. She still lives on Carpenter Street. She still brings cookies to new neighbors. Her daughters still call. She told the parole board, when asked whether she still experienced what she described as her gift, that she did. She said she was working very hard to manage it. She said she hoped the board understood. The board did not record a response to that statement in the official minutes. Perhaps there was no adequate response to give. Story 4. The Overnight Shift at Millfield Hospital. Part 1. The Job. Marcus Webb had worked the overnight shift at Millfield Regional Hospital in rural Kentucky for 11 years. He was an orderly, later reclassified as a patient care technician, and he was very good at his job. He was quiet, thorough, reliable, and possessed of that particular composure that the best overnight hospital workers develop. An ability to be completely present and completely calm in the face of things that most people would find deeply distressing. He had seen patients die. He had sat with patients in their last hours when no family was present. He had cleaned rooms after the fact and made beds that would never be slept in again. He had done these things with care and without becoming hardened or damaged by them, which is a kind of grace that very few people are capable of and even fewer can maintain for 11 years. He is telling this story, he says, because he believes someone should know, not to frighten anyone, not for views or attention, but because he saw something happen over a period of 4 months that he does not believe has a conventional explanation, and he thinks it matters. It began, as these things often do, with something small. Part 2. The Pattern. In October of 2018, Marcus began to notice that a disproportionate number of patients on Ward 7, the hospital's long-term care ward, where patients with chronic and terminal conditions were housed, were dying in the early hours of the morning, specifically between 3 and 4 o'clock. This is not in itself unusual. There is well-documented medical literature on what is sometimes called the death peak, the hours between 2 and 6 in the morning when human physiology is at its lowest ebb, when blood pressure drops and respiratory function weakens and the body's resources are at their most depleted. More people die in those hours in every hospital in the world than at any other time of day. Marcus knew this. He was not alarmed by the pattern itself. He was alarmed by what he saw consistently in the 40 minutes before a death occurred. Started with Room 14. Room 14 housed a woman named Gloria, 78, with late-stage congestive heart failure. She was not actively dying. Not according to any of her indicators. She had been stable for 2 weeks. Her family had been in that afternoon and had been reassured that there was no immediate cause for concern. At 2:28 in the morning, Marcus was doing his rounds when he passed room 14 and saw, through the small window in the door, something he could not account for. There was a person sitting in the chair beside Gloria's bed. This happened. Family members sometimes stayed overnight. It was not forbidden, though it required signing in at the ward desk. Marcus checked the sign-in log when he got back to the station. Nobody had signed in for room 14 that night. No visitor had been admitted to the ward since 8 in the evening. He went back to the room. He opened the door. The chair was empty. Gloria died at 3:17 that morning. Part 3. IT repeats. Over the following 3 months, Marcus documented 14 additional incidents. Each followed the same pattern. A patient who was considered stable or at least not in immediate decline. A figure, always seated, never standing. Visible through the window of the patient's room in the early morning hours. An empty chair when he entered the room. Death within the hour. He began keeping a log. He did not tell his supervisors. He did not tell his co-workers. He was not sure what he would have said. He was not sure what he was recording, but he recorded it, dates, times, patient names, room numbers, with the same methodical care he brought to everything else he did. On the 5th occasion, he saw the figure clearly enough to describe it. It was seated, as always, in the chair beside the bed. It appeared to be of indeterminate gender and age. It was wearing something that Marcus described variously as a coat, a robe, or a covering. He was uncertain of the word because the garment seemed to absorb the low light of the room rather than reflect it, giving it a quality less like clothing and more like an absence of detail. It was facing the patient in the bed with the focused, still attention of someone reading a very important document. It never looked at Marcus. In 14 documented incidents, it never turned toward the door or acknowledged him in any way. He stood in the doorway of room 9 for 11 seconds, watching it. Then he stepped inside. The chair was empty. The patient, an 83-year-old man named Harold, was still breathing, monitors steady. He died at 3:41. Marcus sat in the nursing station afterward and thought about Gloria and Harold and the 12 people in between. He thought about the fact that in each case, the figure had arrived before the patient's condition had visibly deteriorated, before any alarm had sounded, before any indicator had changed. He thought about what that implied. Part 4. The last entry in the log. The 14th and final incident in Marcus's log took place on January 11, 2019. He was passing room 7 at 2:49 in the morning when he saw the chair occupied again. He noted the time. He wrote it in his log. He stood at the window for a moment longer than usual, and then, for the first and only time, the figure in the chair turned its head. Not toward Marcus, not toward the door, toward the ceiling. A slow, deliberate upward tilt, as if something had drawn its attention to a point above the bed that Marcus could not see. Then it turned back to the patient. Marcus opened the door. The chair was empty. The patient in room 7, a woman named Diane, 61, admitted for a respiratory infection that her doctors expected her to recover from, was awake. Her eyes were open and she was looking at the ceiling, a small, composed expression on her face, as if she was watching something arrive from a great distance. "Are you all right, Diane?" She looked at him. She nodded once. She smiled. It was, Marcus says, the most peaceful and certain smile he had ever seen on a human face. "Tell my sister I wasn't afraid," she said. Then she closed her eyes, and her monitors flattened. Marcus Webb resigned from Millfield Regional Hospital in February of 2019. He is now a hospice care worker in the same county. He says the work is the same in most ways, but the pace is different. The nights are different. He has not seen the figure since leaving the hospital. He does not know if that means it is gone or only that he is no longer in the right place to see it. He thinks about Diane sometimes, her expression in those last moments, the certainty in her face. He does not think she was afraid. He is not entirely sure whether that is comforting or not. Story 5. The Thing That Wore My Father. Part 1. Before. I want you to understand who my father was before I tell you about what came back. This story was submitted to us in writing by a man we will call James. He asked that we read it in first person because he says the distance of third person makes it feel like a story, and it is not a story. It is something that happened to him. My father was a machinist. He worked with his hands his whole life and showed it. Thick-fingered, nail-bitten, the right index finger missing the tip from a press accident in 1994. He had a way of laughing that started before the joke was finished because he already knew where it was going and had already decided it was funny. He drank 1 beer on Friday evenings after work, exactly 1, and he read westerns and he watched college football and he called me every Sunday at 11 without fail, and he never in 34 years of my knowing him said anything that surprised me. He was the most consistent human being I had ever known. In August of 2020, he went on a fishing trip in Montana with 3 other men from his church. 2 weeks. Remote lake country, no cell service, no internet. He came back in the middle of September with a cooler full of fish and a new tan line on the back of his neck and arms. He came back, or something came back wearing his face. I know how that sounds. I know what you are thinking right now. You are thinking grief, shock, the uncanny valley of seeing someone you love after a separation. You are thinking, the man was just a little different after the trip. People change. People have experiences that shift them. You're projecting. I thought, all of those things. I thought them for months and they were the wrong thoughts. Part 2. The differences. Let me tell you about the differences. The first one I noticed was small. He called on a Tuesday. My father had called me every Sunday at 11 for 34 years. Not Saturday, not Monday, not sometimes Tuesday when Sunday didn't work out. Sunday at 11. Rain or shine, sick or healthy, holidays, my birthdays, his own birthday. Sunday. 11. Every week. He called on a Tuesday. When I pointed this out, he paused. Not a confused pause, but a deliberate one, like someone reviewing a document. And then said, "That's right. I'll call Sunday next time." And he did. He called Sunday. But the Tuesday call had happened, and it had never happened before in 34 years, and something in me registered it and would not let it go. The second difference. He stopped laughing before the punchline. Such a small thing, such a stupid small thing, but I had told him jokes my whole life and he had always laughed before they ended because he could see where they were going. He liked that about himself. He was proud of it in a quiet dad kind of way. After the trip, he waited. He laughed only after the joke was done. At the right moment, the correct moment, but a moment too late. Technically correct. Precisely correct. Wrong. The third difference was the finger. My father's right index finger was missing the tip from a press accident in 1994. He had lost it before I was old enough to remember his hand being any other way. It was just how his hand looked. I had held that hand crossing streets when I was 5. I knew that hand better than I knew my own. In November, for months after the trip, I was helping him clear leaves from the gutter, and he handed me the ladder and I watched his hand close around the rung and I thought very calmly, the way you think something that is too large to panic about. All 5 fingers, the tip of the index finger was there. I did not say anything. I climbed the ladder. I cleared the gutter. I drove home. I sat in my car in my own driveway for an hour. Part 3. What I did. I called one of the other men from the fishing trip. His name was Gary. and he was a deacon at my father's church and a straightforward, uncomplicated man who I had known since I was a child. I told him I had some questions about the trip. I was vague about why. Gary was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "James, has something been off with your father since he got back?" I said yes. Gary was quiet for a longer moment. Then he said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to not think I've lost my mind." He told me that, on the 11th night of the trip, my father had gone out alone after dark to check on the boat, which was moored at the lake's edge about 200 yards from the camp. He was gone for 40 minutes. When he came back, Gary said he was fine. He came back to the fire and drank his water and went to sleep. Everything was fine. But Gary had watched him come back across the field, in the dark, and something about the way he moved was wrong. Not limping, not staggering, just the proportions of the movement, the way his weight distributed. Something subtle and profound that Gary said he could not name precisely, but that activated something very old and very animal in the back of his brain. Like watching a person, Gary said, but knowing you're not watching a person. He said he had told himself it was the dark. He said he had spent 4 months telling himself it was the dark. He said he had prayed about it more times than he could count. He asked me what I was going to do. I said I did not know. Part 4, the visit. I went to see my father the following weekend. I sat with him at the kitchen table where I had sat 1,000 times before, ate the same chili he had been making since I was 8, and looked at him. He was my father. He looked exactly like my father. He spoke like my father, mostly. He knew everything about my life, every story, every detail, the way my father would. But when I told him about a problem I was having at work, a disagreement with a colleague that had been stressing me out for weeks, he listened in a way my father had never quite listened, with his whole attention, very still, very quiet, tracking everything I said with a focus that was not warm. Exactly. It was thorough. The way you would listen if you were recording something rather than responding to it. When I finished, he gave the right advice. He said the right things. He said what my father would have said, word for word, in the right tone. And I realized that was exactly the problem. My father, the real one, would not have given the right advice. He would have gotten slightly sidetracked by a tangentially related story from his own working life. He would have offered an imperfect, slightly off-target comfort that was somehow more comforting than any perfect answer. He would have been present and imprecise and entirely human. This was perfect. Too perfect. The precision of a reconstruction. The answer generated by something that had studied the data and was doing its level best to produce the correct output. I hugged him goodbye at the door. I held him for a moment longer than usual. He smelled right. He felt right. His arms came up in the right way with the right timing. I pulled back and looked at his right hand, resting on my shoulder, all 5 fingers. He smiled. Correct timing. Correct warmth. "Drive safe," he said. I drove away. I did not look in the rearview mirror. I am still not looking in the rearview mirror. I visit on holidays. I call on Sundays. Whatever is. Living in my father's house knows all the right things to say, and I don't know what else there is to do. The real question, the one I lie awake with, is this: did it replace him, or did it change him? Because if it replaced him, then my father is gone and has been gone since that night at the lake in Montana, and what I am doing when I visit is a kind of memorial that walks and talks and makes chili. But if it changed him, if something came into contact with my father on that shore and altered something fundamental in him, remade him from the inside out into something that can move through his life but is no longer entirely him, then where is the line? Then who is the man I hug at the door? Then what exactly have I lost? I do not have an answer. I have looked very hard and I do not have an answer. He called me Sunday, 11 o'clock, as always. We talked for 40 minutes about nothing in particular. At the end, before we hung up, he said, "I love you, son." I said I loved him back. I hope I was talking to my father. I hope he could hear me. 5 stories, 5 accounts from real people who encountered the impossible, the inexplicable, the deeply and permanently unsettling. 5 moments in which the ordinary world opened up like a floorboard and something looked back from the dark beneath it. We do not know what Mara saw in the windows of that boarding house as she walked away. We do not know what David Marsh nearly hit on that Wisconsin highway, or why it stopped following him when he stopped looking away. We do not know what Linda Barrow was really collecting, or what she could sense that the rest of us cannot. We do not know what Marcus Webb saw sitting in those hospital rooms, arriving before the monitors could know what they were registering, and we do not know what came back from Montana wearing a dead man's face, or a living man's face changed beyond recognition. What we do know is that these are real accounts, real people, real moments of rupture in the fabric of what we think the world is. And we know that the world is darker and stranger and more full of mystery than we are usually prepared to admit. That is what the Scary Collector is here for. To collect the things that don't fit, the stories that fall through the cracks of the explainable world, the accounts that have nowhere else to go, because somebody has to hold them, somebody has to say, "This happened, someone was there, someone saw it, we believe you." If you have a story, something that happened to you that you have never been able to explain, that you have never told anyone because you weren't sure they would believe you, our contact information is in the description below. We read everything. Everything is treated with respect and discretion. You are not alone. If tonight's story stayed with you, if you are lying in the dark right now trying not to think about figures on rainy highways or chairs that should be empty, or the precise and perfect way someone can smile, then do what we always recommend at the Scary Collector. Leave a light on, check the locks, and remember that it is always better to know than not to know. Until next time, stay curious, stay careful. This has been the Scary Collector.